Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Real Talks After Dark. Um, I hope everybody had a fantastic day. Um, so, what I was wanted to do um, is because I'm trying to get all these videos that ready for you guys for the beginning of the year, um, and I have some of them done, but I'm still a little bit behind, so I figure I'd stream them and then I'll go back and edit them later on. I was going to do them pre-recorded. Anyways, so this is probably going to be the first of a couple of streams, not tonight, but over the next couple of days, and then I'll go back and edit them. So let's. We've got a great movie tonight. This is a movie that I can't believe is 40 years old, and it's still, I watched it and it was, I mean, I've seen it 20, 30 times and it's still so much fun. It's a blast, the comedy, everything. And we'll get into that in a little bit. And so, it's one of those things where I, I just, I can't believe it's 40. And so it's from an actor that, we talked about him the other day. And the film I'm talking about is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Yes, it's turning 40, guys. Can you believe that? 1984. And, you know, like 1994, we had, three of arguably the greatest movies of all time come out in Forrest Gump and Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction. This was 1984 was a really special year. And it was a special year because we had a myriad, a myriad. I mean, we do every year, but 1984 had an absolute plethora of fantastic films we look back on to today and go, oh my God, that came out, that came out, that came out. So just a little, just a little sample size. Okay. We had Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Okay. We had Ghostbusters, which I'll be doing this month for the retrospectives. And by the way, I'm going to be doing quite a few of these 1984 films, but just wanted to. So we had Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. We had Ghostbusters. We had the Karate Kid. We had the Terminator. Okay. We had Gremlins. Unbelievable movies. And it was just, it was kind of an interesting year because it's one of those things where it was kind of a dark year, but it wasn't too dark of a year. And 1984 was a pivotal year in film, not only because of the films that came out, but because of what happened after. So there was a big, big something that happened in 1984 having to do with the movies and the MPAA. And the MPAA is now the MPA, but it's a Motion Pictures Association. Back then it was the Motion Pictures Association of America. So there were a couple of films that really hit home, if you will. Um, and one of them is a family favorite, but it's kind of a dark film back in the day. And I'm talking about Gremlins. Gremlins was a movie that came out 40 years ago, but it was a really dark movie. Like, to the extent of they had to actually get a brand new rating for some of this stuff because of some of the scenes. So, I mean, who remembers this? One of the gremlins gets shoved into a microwave and boom. So let me talk about the MPAA and what happened. Okay, but and I'm gonna do this prior to the introduction, which I usually do first, because, by the way, I forgot about Beverly Hills Cop, another fantastic movie. I can't wait for Beverly Hills Cop 4 that's coming out on Netflix. Anyways, but I want to touch upon this because this really changed the game, right? This really changed the game and how we look at film. And, the younger generation doesn't know why we have a PG-13 rating. So The MPAA introduced the PG-13 rating on July 1st, 1984, less than 2 months after Temple of Doom's release and just 1 month after Gremlins. With both movies still in theaters and pulling in a healthy box office, now healthy back in the day, implementation was just that fast. The first movie to receive an MPA PG-13 rating, okay, was Red Dawn. Now, Red Dawn, okay, so anybody who's not familiar with Red Dawn, now Red Dawn, yes, there was a remake back in 2012 with Chris Hemsworth. Horrible movie. Okay, same premise, it just didn't go well. This was a movie back in 1984. Now you got to remember. Let me set the scene a little bit. Okay, let me set the scene a little bit. We have a film, okay, in Red Dawn, okay, that basically you got to remember where we are in the world. 1984. So there's, we have the Soviets and we have the United States. Okay, the two superpowers of the world. And what that did was everything, any villain during the 80s, right around the 80s, I mean, you look at Rocky IV, for example, you look at Red Dawn, you look at any other of these other films, who was the villain? The Soviets, right? So we were in a race. Okay, it was actually called Star Wars, but it was more of a interstellar type of race. So, anyways, Red Dawn. Red Dawn was about a bunch of freedom fighters. Okay, the Soviets came in to America and attacked us, and we had these freedom fighters. They were called Wolverines. For anybody who watched the film, and they actually, repelled the borders. But this cast, guys, was stacked. Look at this picture. Take a look at this picture. This was a stacked cast. Now, you have Patrick Swayze in the middle. Okay. You have Leah Thompson over to his left. You have a young, this is even before Wall Street, 3 years before Wall Street, guys. People remember, Charlie Sheen getting his real major stardom in Wall Street. This was before Wall Street. Okay. You had a young Charlie Sheen in this. Okay. C. Thomas Howell was in it. You had over to his right, you had Jennifer Grey. This is 5 years before Dirty Dancing. So this is crazy, right? This film, okay, was the very first one to get the PG-13 rating. But then, of course, you had Gremlins, which, I just demonstrated with how that was, a little violent. But it was supposed to be a, quote, kids movie with Gizmo, okay? And then Temple of Doom, which we're going to get into, and the reason why it was dark and everything else. So back to Red Dawn real quick. Okay, so in 1984, so that was the first film to get a PG-13 rating. It was a speculative war film about a Colorado teenagers named the Wolverines who became freedom fighters following the Soviet invasion. The film was keeping in the politics of the Reagan era, despite a lukewarm response from the critics. It became a mild box office success in August of 1984. It retains a cult following to this day, particularly among Gen Xers, who were coming up at the time when the ratings got introduced, for whom Red Dawn was the first, quote, grown-up film they could see without asking a grown-up. Now, it's interesting because that was the first film, but we've had thousands since, thousands of PG-13 films. So none of that holds a candle to the PG-13 rating, which quickly got implemented in the uproar of two movies: Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which we're going to be talking about tonight, and Gremlins, which I'll be talking about later on. Both released in the summer of 1984, got billed as friendly family film blockbusters that kill into the Star Wars movies. Because don't forget, Harrison Ford had just come off doing Return of the Jedi, right? But the sight of a man's heart getting pulled from his chest and scarily monsters getting blown up in the microwave, as depicted, okay, as depicted in this picture here, okay, and there's a shot later on I'll show you with that left audiences a little like, So under the auspices of a family-friendly PD was enough to prompt a rethink. So it's really interesting to see how this changed things, because these couple of movies really changed the industry. It changed the era of what was out. It changed the era of the ratings and ushered in a whole new thing. So, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Once again, fun, but it was very, very dark. Before I get into the movie, once again, as always, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys the introductions and talk about the cast and everything else. And then I'm going to talk about like the production and the development, and really the story behind Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Because I think, once again, for me, and I think others, when you go back and you rewatch these movies, it gives you a different perspective. So, this was released actually May 23rd, 1984. I know that says June 15th, but so there was a big movie that was released, a big comedy that was released, okay, and that was Police Academy. That was released then. But these are the films that were released this month. This just tells you how big 1984, not only 1984, but this month alone, right? You had 16 Candles starring Molly Ringwald. That was released on the 4th. You had The Natural starring Robert Redford, that's a great movie. And Firestarter was released on the 11th of May. So that started very young Drew Barrymore. And of course, she had just come off doing E.T. the year before. So, of course, they tried to do a remake a couple years ago that didn't go so well, but nonetheless, so Firestarter was there. Then you had Romancing the Stone, okay, which was the follow-up, okay, and a movie I walked out on. I mean, I was probably 7 at the time, but it's only one of 3 movies I've ever walked out on, and that was Greystone Legend of Tarzan. That was on the 30th. So, anyways, so this was produced by the one and only Kathleen Kennedy. Yes, that is the same Kathleen Kennedy that is running Star Wars, and she is the studio head of Lucasfilms. She was an associate producer on this. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were EPs, or executive producers. So once again, this was directed by Spielberg. And the budget. Now, I'm talking about the budget here, and once again, the budget is one of those things where it's important, but you got to keep in mind exactly how much it made and everything else. Hello, Dadpool. How are you? I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a great day. So yeah, so that was so here the budget for this. This budget was only $28 million, and it ended up making, believe it or not, guys, $333 million. About 180 domestic and about 150 overseas, and adjusted for inflation today, that's over $560 million, and $563.7 million. Unbelievable stuff. So the opening weekend, believe it or not, was, and I'm putting this in quotes, only $25 million. Only $25 million. Now, mind you, it made 150. Okay, it made 179, 180 here in the States, and it only opened to $25 million. But that just tells you something. This was longevity back then. Remember, there weren't as many theaters, but these films stayed in the theaters longer. Okay, so This only opened, speaking of that, to 1,687 theaters nationwide. We have over 3,500 theaters today. So that's almost fewer than 50% of the total number of theaters across the country. So it amassed a record breaking $45.7 million in its first week. Okay. And now, week. Remember what I said, weekend. Okay. It made 25, but in its first week, it made an additional $20 million in its first week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So remember that. That's key. That's where I gotta say that though. That's where most movies, when we talk about um, take home and what it makes opening weekend and whatever, it's not. You take a look at a movie, and I'm going to point it out here. You take a look at a movie like Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers didn't become a $1 billion movie because it blew up for $300 million opening weekend, like an Endgame, right? Super Mario Brothers. The reason why it made $1 billion is because it made so. There were a couple factors. Number one, you had the nostalgia factor. Number two, it was short. It was only 90 minutes. I mean, I watched it and it went by like that. Okay. Number three, kids love it. Okay. I mean, whether it's adults, kids, whatever. But more importantly, those three or four things, but more importantly, it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That is where these movies make their money. Um, Deadpool says, I finally watched Barbie. Oh my God, super cringy. Yeah, I mean, it can be. It can be a super cringy movie. I mean, now mind you, I haven't seen it since. No, it's funny. I've seen Oppenheimer 3 times, all in IMAX. I've seen Barbie the once. I actually, I liked, for what it was, I liked Barbie. Um, and I think that Greta Gerwig, it's a different kind of movie. Um, yeah, I mean, it can be super cringy. I look, I think that, money aside, I think that honestly, this is going to, I was running through the number of nominations um, in my head the other day. I think this could probably get 8 to 9 Oscar nominations. I mean, we have the whole war. I mean, guys, stay tuned on the 7th of January. I'm going to be doing a whole Golden Globes preview and wrap up show. I think it's going to do well. I mean, you got to understand, um, it's one of those things where it's it's going to do well in nominations. And then he says it was no Temple of Doom. That's for sure. That's for sure. It was no Temple of Doom. But Temple of Doom was dark, and I'm going to get into that in a couple of minutes. Um, but so that being said, it amassed 45.7 million in its first week and had the highest opening weekend of 1984, and that year's highest grossing film, third in North America behind, guess what? Beverly Hills Cop and Ghostbusters. Two unbelievable. And that really tells you something too, right? Because the comedies. People love comedy. The 1980s was a very innocent kind of um, era, right? I mean, it was big. I mean, look, like I said the other day, you had big movies, you had big hair, you had big, rock anthems. You had everything was big back then. But comedies were big back then. I mean, runs the gamut from a Ghostbusters, from a Beverly Hills Cop, from a Trading Places, from a, any other kind of comedy you can, I mean, and that was back then. That was the era of raunchy. You could get away with things you couldn't get away with. I mean, even American Pie today would be considered, oh my God, really? You know, um, The 1980s jumps out. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And one of the greatest horror movies of not only the 80s but of all time was done in that year. And I'm talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. That when we talk about slasher movies, we talk about Freddy Krueger's on the Mount Rushmore. I mean, Freddy Krueger. I mean, you have Jason, you have Freddy Krueger, you have Michael Myers, and then you could put in anyone you want. You know, Pinhead or you know, Jigsaw or whatever. But Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund, really, Wes Craven was a genius, and that was big because you had a myriad sequels and sequels and sequels. And by the way, I remember going to see the 2000. I said this to you, Deadpool. I remember going to see the 2012 version when they wanted to. It was just a mess. Now I have yet to sit down and watch it again. I want to, but no, you're absolutely right about that. It did jumpstart the horror genre. So back then, it was also the 10th highest grossing film of all time during its release. It sold an estimated 53.5 million tickets here in the United States. Okay, so now that we've got the little intro out of the way, let's talk about the cast. So, of course, we have Harrison Ford, Kate Capshaw, Ki Wai Kwan, and Amarsh Pur, who played Mullerem. And this was a really good shot of everybody back then. And you see Spielberg and Lucas are really stoic in that picture, and I'm going to get talking about that in a couple minutes. But there's reason for it. But so that was they actually, one of the main reasons was the divorce that Spielberg, well, Kate Capshaw and Steven Spielberg ended up getting married. And on the flip side of the coin, you had George Lucas, who was going through a divorce. And then you had Key in the middle. And it's fascinating because, you take a look at this picture from Indy 5, and it's really cool to see, by the way. You had Key all these years later. He was so over the moon when he won all these awards, and he won, his Oscar last year and everything else. And Harrison Ford, coming back. So this memory holds a special place for me. It was a movie my dad and I would watch a lot of BS. Watch, rewind, watch, repeat. Yeah. It's a special movie, to a lot of people, and it's really one of those things that I think that and movies in general are special. But if you can actually, and when we talk about the sequel-itis that it had back in the day, but yeah, that's cool. That's and if you can have a memory with somebody about a movie, that's fantastic. So, okay, so that is your cast. So Kate Capshaw, Ki Wai Kwan. Okay, so let's talk about the development real quick. So I'm going to go back to this picture here because Lucas and Spielberg were geniuses back in the day. They were geniuses. I mean, they are still considered two of the best filmmakers of all time. Okay, and rightfully so. So how did this really come to be? So Spielberg recalled that Lucas first approached him for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And this is Spielberg. George said if I directed the first one, then I would have to direct a trilogy. He had 3 stories in mind. It turned out George didn't have 3 stories in mind, and we had to make subsequent stories. So both men later attributed the film's tone, which was darker than Raiders of the Lost Ark, to their personal moods following the breakups and relationships, what I was just referring to. In addition, Lucas felt it, quote, had to be a dark film, the way Empire Strikes Back was the dark second act of the Star Wars trilogy. Spielberg had said, the danger in making a sequel is that you can never satisfy everyone. If you give people the same movie with different scenes, then why weren't you more original? But if you give them the same character in another fantastic adventure, but with a different tone, you risk disappointing the other half of the audience who just wanted a carbon copy of the first film with a different girl and a different bad guy. So you win and you lose both ways. And he's right. I mean, I'll tell you something. There's another film, and I've said this before. There's another film too that I remember sitting down and watching in the theater, and I went, "Oh my God, it's carbon copy," and that's The Force Awakens. The first act of The Force Awakens, is a carbon copy, a carbon copy of Star Wars. It is. It is. Think about it. The only difference is the protagonist is female instead of male. That's it. Think about it. It's on a desert, okay, planet. Okay. You had droids involved. Okay. You had a chase in the first 15 minutes. Okay. With whether it's on the sand or in the sky. I mean, that was one of the things with a Star Destroyer. Everything about that was a carbon copy, except the story was original and it was different. I mean, it was, but you mix up the characters. So you can completely see where he's coming from. So he says, Deadpool says here, a little nugget. In Loki Season 2, there's a callback, Easter egg to Ki-Wai Kwan's character and Data from the Goonies in Short Round from Temple of Doom. That's very cool. And as a matter of fact, speaking of callbacks, Deadpool, that's an absolutely perfect segue for me. So one of the first things when we're in the nightclub, okay, what is the nightclub called? Club Obi-Wan. Of course, it's an Easter egg to Star Wars. And this actually, they not littered it, but they gave you little nuggets, little breadcrumbs throughout the whole thing. That was just one of them. And by the way, guys, there was a we always talk about cameos today and how it blows up and everything else. There was a cameo back in the first 15 minutes, and I saw it, I heard the voice, I went, and I rewound it, and I went, oh my God, that's Dan Aykroyd. Yes, the same Dan Aykroyd that played in the 1984 Ghostbusters. He was in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now you say, well, where was he? So when Indy and Short Round and Willie are about to get on the cargo plane, okay, he is the one that greets him at the airport. His name was Weber. 2-second cameo, in and out, gone. But yeah, that's a really fascinating thing. So they like to just give you little hints and callbacks, and that's really cool as a filmmaker. So so getting back to the development real quick, and he's right, because you run the risk of, you have to be able to give your audience something different. So Lucas set the film in earlier years than the first to avoid repeating use of the film's the Nazis as a villain. Now, here's something key. This takes place, okay, Temple of Doom takes place in the Indiana Jones timeline. It takes place in 1935. Okay, Raiders of the Lost Ark, okay, takes place, I won't say much later, but I think that's in the 40s or the 50s. I don't remember the year off the top of my head, but it does take place later on. So this Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was a prequel, if you will, in the time. It was a sequel, but it was a prequel. So it had both of those things there. Um, so, and Spielberg originally wanted to bring back Marion Ravenwood, but with Abner Ravenwood considered as a possible character. In the development, Lucas conceived of an opening chase with Indiana Jones on a motorcycle in the Great Wall of China, followed by the discovery of a lost world with a hidden valley inhabited by dinosaurs. Another idea was to feature the Monkey King as the plot device. However, Chinese authorities refused permission for them to film in the country, requiring a different setting. Lucas wrote a film treatment that included a haunted castle in Scotland, but Spielberg felt it was too similar to Poltergeist, so they transformed everything into a demonic temple in India, which, and this is where we get very dark down the road. Lucas came up with the idea that involved a religious cult devoted to child slavery, black magic, and ritual of human sacrifice. Now, can we talk about dark for a minute? This is one of the darkest movies you're ever going to see. And so once they get into the castle, right? So they they get thrown out. They essentially get out of the plane. The plane crashes. They go down on a raft, and then they come into India, and they go to this village, and of course they are trying to figure out, and they are, they have no water, no, their crops are dying, their animals, their livestock are dying, everything. And subsequently, what ends up happening is they said, our children are being taken from us and everything else. One of the children comes back with a cloth of this artifact. So they go to Bangkok. And this is when you have Indy and everybody else start their adventure there. And one of the things was the Thuggies. The Thuggies were supposed to be a myth and supposed to be, not around anymore. Had been gone for 100 years and everything else. And so there was suspicious things going on. And at one point, Indiana Jones finds a statue, and little sexual reference there, but he pushes on the breast of the statue, and in it basically why he sees it is because the air is coming through. So we push it, and he finds a secret tunnel. Finds the same thing, and then they start walking, and Short Round's like these. I feel like I'm walking on fortune cookies. Of course, there weren't fortune cookies; they were insects. So one of the funniest scenes for me is I'm gonna see if I can't do this, but one of the funniest scenes for me is so they're going down, and they're going down, and then they get trapped somewhere. And Indy's like, just go up against the wall. So he goes up against the wall, and he basically locks them in there with these huge spikes. And Willie has to come save them. But this is one of the funniest memes. my buddy and I always have the GIF battles back and forth. And this is the one I always, it's 40 years later, and the way he says it, we are going to die. And it's just a frown too, right? And so it's hilarious. So basically, they end up discovering as I just showed, they end up discovering this cult, essentially, down in the catacombs. And it's crazy. And the set, and this was all, and so they find out where the stones are. and it was down there in that little skull, and But getting back to the themes, these were some of the darkest themes you'd ever seen in your life. It did have child slavery, black magic, you know, um, human ritual sacrifice. Um, so it's yeah. Let me show you guys. I mean, because it's kind of crazy to even think about today. Um, by the way, there is no way, no how this movie could have gotten made today. There is just no way. Um, and so, I mean, when the sacrifice happens, this is when they don't know they're being watched. But when the sacrifice happens, Mola Ram just there's no way this could have gotten made today. I'm sorry. There's no way. Can you imagine something like this being made today? Not a chance. But they were able to get away with it back in 1984, and this is why they have a PG-13 rating. Uh, if it did get made, number one, I don't think it would be as elaborate. Number two, it would definitely be rated R. But yeah, so it had a lot of really, really dark themes. Um, Lawrence Kasner of Raiders of the Lost Ark was actually asked to write the script. I didn't want to be associated with the Temple of Doom, he reflected. I just thought it was horrible. It's so mean. There's nothing pleasant about it, he said. I think Temple of Doom represents a chaotic period in both Lucas's and Spielberg's life, and he's right. And the movie is very ugly and mean-spirited. Lucas hired Gloria Katz and William Hurt to write the script because of their knowledge of the Indian culture. So Gungan Din actually served as an influence. So Lucas, Hux, and Katz began developing Radioland Murders ever since the 1970s. And the opening music was taken from the script and applied to Temple of Doom. And Spielberg reflected. George's idea was to start the movie with a musical number, and that's the musical number that, basically that we see in the very as soon as the credits roll. As soon as the credits roll, we see the musical number, and so he always wanted to shoot one. And so at the story meetings, so that was a upbeat way to start it. So they were concerned about how the audience, they keep the audience interest when explaining the Thuggee cult. And a couple of them proposed a tiger hunt, but Spielberg said, there's no way I'm going to stay in India long enough to shoot a tiger hunt. They eventually decided on a dinner scene involving bugs, monkey brains, and the likes. And by the way, let's talk about something else here. Like the whole dinner scene. I mean, it's still one of the absolute most I wrote it down. It's still one of the most grotesque scenes I've ever seen in my life. Now, it's grotesque to the extent of we here in the United States think it's grotesque, right? Because we're not accustomed to their culture. But it's to that culture, it was no problem. So it was a little interesting in that respect. So Steve and George were both still react like children. So it was their idea to make it as gross as possible, and they succeeded. They absolutely succeeded. So let's talk about the casting real quick, because obviously the casting is something that, without the right casting, these films, they get made, but they're not as good, right? So Harrison Ford reprised his role as Indiana Jones from Raiders of the Lost Ark. For the role of Willie Scott, More than 1,000 actresses auditioned. Among the totally unknown actresses auditioning for the role was a young, believe it or not, a young Sharon Stone. Finally, Spielberg chose Kate Capshaw after viewing her videotape test and showed it to Harrison Ford. For the role of Short Round, casting director Mike Fenton arranged on open calls on East Asian boys to come in and audition in several major cities, including New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Hawaii, Toronto, Chicago, Montreal, Hong Kong, and London. Originally, Ke Huy Quan's younger brother went to audition for the role, and while Ke tagged along. The producers had noticed that Ke was giving his brother directions behind the camera during the audition, so the casting director asked Ke to give it a shot, and a few days later he was cast in the role. For the various Indian characters in the film, the villagers were played by Sri Lankan actors or actresses, while the characters at Bangkok Palace were primarily played by Indian actors. For the role of Mola Ram, the arch villain, they searched through England and the United States to find someone to play the part, as both Lucas and Spielberg were most anxious that they did not cast the principal actor roles with Western actors darkened down. They couldn't find anybody among the resident Indian actors in the United States, so they got a permit for this actor. So this is, once again, so they got a permit for this actor to come in and actually film, who was working on 18 films in India simultaneously at the time of his casting. Think about that. 18 films. I don't know how he does it or did it. That's I would love to know that. Puri had met with Spielberg and initially declined the role, but was convinced after speaking with Richard Attenborough, who Premium had worked with on a small part in Gandhi. That was 1981, I believe. And Ben Kingsley ended up winning Best Actor for that. So Roshan Seth, who played the Prime Minister, also appeared in Gandhi. So that was very interesting. So there was a little bit of a connection there. So the filming. The filming is one of those things that's incredibly important to these. And it's one of those things that if the filming doesn't go right, it's going to be a long, long, long shoot. So the filmmakers were denied permission to film in North India, and due to the government finding the script offensive. Producer Frank Marshall explained that, quote, originally the scenes were going to be shot in India at a fantastic palace. They required us to give them the script, so we sent it over, and we didn't think anything was going to be a problem. But because of the voodoo element with Mola Ram and the Thuggies, the Indian government was a little bit hesitant to give us permission. They wanted us to do things like not use the term Maharaj, and they didn't want us to shoot in a particular temple that we had picked. The Indian government wanted changes to the script and final cut privileges. And listen, I think that, and you can even see this in China, okay? China is one of those countries, even with Marvel, right? For many, 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 many years, they basically would not show any of Marvel's films because of certain things. Whether it was, namely the LGBTQ things, whether it was from Eternals or whether it was Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, or there was a number of different things. And I mean, not that they needed the money, because they certainly did well. But when it comes to final cut privileges, my feeling is this. You have a vision, okay? You have an idea, you have a vision of what you want to make. If they are not going to let you shoot that or film that, then, and they want final, then no, not at all. So sorry. Bye. We'll find somewhere else. And it's basically because they are then dictating to you what they want, right? So it's like anything else. And if you let that happen, where does it stop? Right? So whether it's language or whether it's this being shown or the sexual orientation of that character, at what point it becomes a very slippery slope. And I think that being said, um, I think they did the right thing. They didn't have any other choice. So, um, that being said, as a result, location work went to Kandy, Sri Lanka, with map paintings and scale models applied for the village, temple, and Bangkok Palace. Budgetary inflation also caused Temple of Doom to cost $28.17 million, eight more than Raiders. But when you look at how much it grossed, obviously, that you're not thinking about that at the time. I understand that. Filming began on April 18th, 1983 in Kandy and moved to Austral Studios in England on May 5th. Marshall recalled, quote, when filming the bug scene, crew members would go home and find bugs in their hair, clothes, and shoes. 8 out of 9 so 8 out of the 9 sound stages at the Astray housed the filming of Temple of Doom. Lucas biographer Marcus Hearn observed, quote, Donald Sluson's skillful lighting helped disguise the fact that about 80% of the film was shot on sound stages. And that's pretty remarkable, right? I mean, we think about that today and but I mean, like this shot here, I can't imagine that was shot on a soundstage. And if it was, that's pretty impressive. Um, but all of these sound stages, you know, we have CGI today, so it's not that big of a deal. Um, but yeah, so now, now that we have talked about the development and the casting and everything else, um, I mean, I basically, and it was in the little tease. I'm not going to go beat by beat because you guys know exactly. The film's been out 40 years. So Indiana Jones goes to help these villagers to go get the stone. And he is then, he goes through a myriad of adventures from the thuggies to, you know, seeing human sacrifices to all of these, going in basically, like dying in a thing of spikes, um, watching somebody's heart get ripped out, and then he gets captured. So he's trying to go get the stones, and then he gets captured. And once he gets captured, that's when, you know, um, he becomes one of them. And Willie is going to get sacrificed. Anyways, they all make it out. And when they make it out, I mean, I think so. Two of the shots for me that really stay with me, at least one of the shots, is this one here, right? Um, it's this one here. It's on the bridge, and that's a crazy, that's just one of, I loved Short Round. He's like, he no crazy, he's no nuts, he's crazy. It's just Ki Kwan was so good in this. He just made it so good. And like even when they're playing cards and he accuses Indy of cheating, um, so that they escape and he gets the stone, brings it back to the village, and they all live happily ever after. But so that's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the story. Um, the couple of things that really came out for me, at least, was, as I said, the we go to die scene is just still hilarious. Um, so that's the interesting thing to me. So when he's down here, okay, and this, he's down and getting the stones. Something that the shot that actually was interesting was it reminded me of or reminded me of Raiders of the Lost Ark when he's going to go switch the statue. Well, he's going to go take the stones. That kind of reminded me of that. Um, that was an interesting little thing. Um, the tunnel sequence. That also, a lot. Don't forget, special effects was starting to make its move at this point. ILM was starting to do things, and so that was a big thing. But that whole third sequence, that whole third act, um, that reminded me of Return of the Jedi. The big third act, right? The chase, or the same kind of template. So I noticed that too, and I've seen this movie 30 times. Never really looked at these things. Callback to Raiders before he's going to the bridge, right? And so in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the guy's got a sword. He just takes out his gun and shoots him, right? That's the comedic part. But this time, he goes to get his gun and he doesn't have it. So he fights one of the guys, and then he's about, he runs, does the fourth wall break, and then he's like, uh-oh, and then he has to run back because there's like 15 guys behind him, and that's when he goes to the bridge. But the comedy that was done, it's just remarkable, so well done. Like I said, the bridge scene, it's still epic. The bridge scene is still, it makes the movie. It really does. I mean, it's kind of like, if you think about it, it's kind of like Star Wars, where Han says, never tell me the odds. And when he's flying in the asteroids, it's the same thing. Never tell me the odds. And it was just fabulous. Let me talk something about this. One of the major things that made this movie so good was the score. John Williams. He's going to be 94. He's still conducting. I mean, there's a handful of fantastic musicians that will have scored. I mean, Hans Zimmer's one, but John Williams. We got to talk about John Williams for a minute. The number of iconic themes that he has put together over the years, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Jaws, whether it's Indiana Jones and whatever, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., on and on and on and on. The score is just so good here. So good. And, I mean, Indy 5. He did Indy 5. He was going to retire. And then Spielberg said, do you want to do it? And he basically said, I can't turn Spielberg down. Or I can't turn Spielberg down. He's that good of they've been working together for 50 years. Right around 50 years. I mean, Jaws is the first one I can think of off the top of my head, 1975. So almost 50 years. And Schindler's List, it's just remarkable. But yeah, the score here is just, it's fantastic. Overall, what did I think of the film? What a fun adventure, right? What a fun adventure to have and go on. You know, it had its moments of seriousness, which, every film should, but it was action packed. It really, really was action packed. It was just, you had, every time you had like a romantic moment or a serious moment, it was followed up by action. So it was always going. It never slowed down. The pacing was fantastic. Um, the comedic beats were great. Movie was very dark though. I mean, once again, talking about child slavery, black magic, human sacrifice. I mean, just wow. And you could definitely tell how it reflected in the filmmakers' viewpoints, right? Um, it was a complete, I said it earlier, it was a complete departure from the first film. I mean, you had Empire Strikes Back in 1980. This is in 84. So, and, Lucas had even said the second one needs to, going back to the quote, he said, the second one needed to be dark. And basically, it had to be a dark film. The way Empire Strikes Back was the dark act of this Star Wars trilogy. So, yeah, I mean, because you can't always make these fun movies. Those are good, but you gotta mix it up a little bit. Um, what else? The so yeah, the backstory about Kate Capshaw and Spielberg definitely played a role in that. The visual effects were good for the time, and of course they were done by ILM, Industrial Light Magic. They were still in its infancy. I mean, don't forget, we're only 9 years out, or not even. We're only 7 years out from the original Star Wars. Yes, they had done a lot of films. They had done, you know, uh, they had done Empire in 1980. They had done Raiders in 81. They had done Temple of Doom, um, and they had a bunch of other things down the road. But it was good for its time. Um, so they were still discovering what they could do, and then having it shot on location, I think was a big important thing because you want as much authenticity as possible, and I think that's important. Um, but this movie was just number one; it couldn't get made today. There is no way, no studio. If you went to a studio with this kind of script today, they'd laugh at you. They would laugh at you. They would be, good luck. Good luck for that. There is no way that could have gotten made today. There is no way because it's so dark. Um, and I think that even with a hero like Indiana Jones, and once again, I talked about this the other day, right? Harrison Ford, for almost 20 years, he held down count them, three franchises. He had Star Wars, which had just wrapped up a year prior in 1983 with Jedi. He was doing the sequel, okay, Temple of Doom. And then in the early 90s, he does Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, which you guys will be seeing later on this year for the retrospectives. But that's crazy. And then he goes to do action, right, in 95 or 96 with Air Force One. Like, come on. So I think that Harrison Ford was one of he was at the peak of his powers during this time. Um, And, once again, the PG-13 rating, right? This is where PG-13 really made its mark. And it had to, right? Um, so, you know, so according to the Motion Picture Association of America, between 1968 and 2017, so we're talking 6 years ago, there have been over 29,000 movies uh, rated. Fewer than 5,000 had been rated PG-13. 4,913. So now, mind you, there's 6 years missing from that. So my guess is you're probably talking 55, close to 6,000 movies. So um, the scene with the bugs gets me every time. The whole scene with uh, Ford and Capshaw was great. Yeah, it really was. It's amazing how dark it was, and yet it was so. They were able to make a comedic bit out of it, right? Um, she was crazy, you know, um, with the fruit, you know, and that's really and that's really, I mean, when push comes to shove, that sequence, like when he's in his room in their um, he goes back to a room, and that's really the end of the first act, right? When they go into the tunnels, that's really the start of the second act. But yeah, I love the cross cutting too. You know, oh, you'll be back in 5 minutes, and they're both looking at the clocks, and it's crazy to think that the cross cutting there was really good in that respect. She was trying to seduce him, but focused on the cave. She was pissed. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's just you know, um, I mean, he eventually got the girl in the end, but it's just one of those. It was about fortune and glory, right? You know, um, she was really good too. It's always interesting when I see people that could have played certain roles. Like, can you imagine? Think about this for a minute. Imagine a young Sharon Stone in Kate Capshaws role. Could do it. Couldn't do it. Or, I mean, on a different movie, one of my favorite movies is Silence of the Lambs. Imagine Gene Hackman playing Hannibal Lecter. Couldn't do it. That's what I mean. There are certain roles you just couldn't imagine other people playing. And I think I couldn't imagine a Sharon Stone against a Harrison Ford. Not against, but, playing off of. But it was just really good in that respect. So now that we've talked all about that, there's another key element here. Okay. And that's the critic reception. So we all know what the filming happened with, and we all know, what went on. How did the critics take this? So Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom received mixed reviews upon its release, but over the years, the film's critical reception has improved. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has improved to a 77% based off 137 reviews. Now, once again, that's a very small sample size. Not as small as 56 like we had the other day, but it's still a very small sample size. The site's consensus read, it might be, quote, too dark for some, but Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom remains an ingenious adventure spectacle that showcases one of Hollywood's finest filmmaking teams in vintage form. Yeah, and I agree with that. Excuse me. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average of 57 out of 100 based on 14 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Now, once again, 14 critics. Okay. Roger Ebert, who I believe is one of the best film critics of not only this generation of all time, he gave the film a perfect 4 stars, calling it, quote, one of the greatest Bruce forearm movies ever. You know what a Bruce forearm movie is. That's the kind of movie where your date is grabbing your forearm is like a vice-like grip, as unbearable excitement unfolds on the screen. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom makes no apologies for being exactly what it is: exhilarating, manic, wildly imaginative escapism. No apologies are necessary. This is the most cheerful, exciting, bizarre, goofy, romantic action adventure movie since Raiders. And it is high praise to say that this is not so much as a sequel, but an equal. You stagger out with a sly grin and a bruised forearm, of course. Um, yeah, I could see it. I mean, it's like, and I've always said this. I think that there's probably 6 or 7 sequels that are better than the originals. Um, I can't imagine anybody, Jonathan Majors playing Kane, way too soon. Yeah, I mean, eh, I think the thing about the Majors situation is that, it happens so soon in the phase, right? It happens so so quick in the phase. It wasn't like there was years and years and years and years into it. And the other thing too is, don't forget about this. Marvel had a contingency plan all along. It's not like they were, playing musical chairs and the music just stopped and they were left without a chair. Okay. They have had contingency plans for years. They just had to put, I mean, look at how fast they put out the statement. Look at how fast they put out the statement and let Majors go. Not even 30 minutes. They had it all prepared, ready to go. All they were going to do was hit send. So, Temple is still one of the best sequels in any franchise. I rate it only behind Godfather Part 2. Wow. That's high praise. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be doing Godfather Part 2 this year, too. So I definitely, yeah, I think so. To your point, I think there's only maybe 7 or 8 sequels that just, there's no doubt in my mind these sequels are better than the originals. First is Empire Strikes Back, hands down, twice on Sunday. Okay, that's the one I think everybody thinks of. Number 2 is The Dark Knight. I think The Dark Knight is a masterclass of Christopher Nolan. And following it, Batman Begins was very good, but to follow it up with The Dark Knight, tremendous. Captain America Winter Soldier. Just, I think it's a perfect, by the way, guys, if you want to go back and watch that, those 2 films actually on my series, Perfect Movies. It's a monthly series, comes out first week of the month, January. We got a brand new Perfect movie coming out for you, okay? And it's Spotlight. I think it's a perfect movie. But yeah, Captain America Winter Soldier. It has everything. And by the way, guys, so speaking of Marvel, what I've decided to do, I'm not going to go through all of the Marvel films, as I said, because it's a lot. But what I am going to do is we're going to do Marvel March, but I'm going to take the 7 or 8 best films. I'm talking about Iron Man. I'm talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm talking about all of the great films. Captain America Winter Soldier, all of the Civil War, all of the great films, and we're going to do that for March. Then for April, what we're going to do, one of the streams, 4 weeks, it will be one a week. We're going to do Avengers April. And it's going to be the Avengers Age of Ultron, Infinity War, and Endgame. And you're going to get one of those a week. So, but yeah, I mean, The Godfather Part 2. And by the way, to your point, Deadpool, The Godfather 2 was a prequel. It was the upbringing of Vito Corleone. And so, Godfather 2, Temple, Terminator 2, Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, I think T2 is in there. I'll be honest with you. I put Top Gun Maverick in there. I would. I would. I would put Top Gun Maverick in there. I think it's better than Top Gun. I think the dogfighting is better. I think, and yeah, part of it is the technology, but the story is better. It's more emotional. I think Top Gun Maverick is right in there. But yeah, so yeah, so as far as sequels go, that's definitely I agree. Ralph Novak of People complained that the quote ads that say the film is much too intense for younger children are fraudulent. No parent should be allowed a young child to see this traumatic movie. It would be a cinematic form of child abuse. Even Harrison Ford is required to slap quiet and abuse Capshaw. There are no heroes connected with this film, only two villains. Their names are Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And this is why film is subjective, right? This is why I always say film is subjective because, look, as I said, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, you couldn't get away with this today. There's no way you can make this movie today. The Guardian summarized as it a, quote, 2-hour series of none too careful linked chases. Sitting on the edge of your seat gives you a sore bum, but is a numb brain. Leonard Maltin gave the movie 2 out of 4 stars, saying that the film is, in quote, headache-inducing and never gives us a chance to breathe. And the shining, the gross-out gags. Look, that's indie, though. That's indie. You're right, Top Gun. Thank you. I mean, I think it's one of those things where Maverick is. I mean, I tear up. I teared up when I went to go see Top Gun Maverick a couple months ago. And it's that good. But so now that we know what the critics said, what did the reaction from the cast and the crew say? Because this is interesting. We always talk about, we always hear many, many years later, oh, this was a horrible idea. Or, this was a really great idea. What did the reaction for the cast and the crew say? Kate Capshaw's performance as Willie Scott has often been criticized for its shrilliness, with Capshaw casting Willie, quote, not much more than a dumb screaming blonde. Further adding that she was, quote, blindsided by the reaction to her character. The thing that surprised me the most was that critics, women critics in particular, were very critical of Willie Scott, as if we were making a political statement and I was doing nothing for my sisters. I found it odd. It was an action adventure film, and we were meant to do a message work. Well, I mean, look, you can even say that about romancing the Stone, like with Kathleen Turner. Like Kathleen Turner, if you want to just for a minute, Romancing the Stone and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, they're not that far off, right? They've got a big male lead in Michael Douglas. They've got a female love interest that is portrayed, okay, even though that's not supposed to be what it was, portrayed as ditzy, and Kathleen Turner. So what makes one better than the other, right? When promoting Last Crusade in 1989, Spielberg said, quote, I wasn't happy with Temple of Doom at all. It was too dark, too subterranean, and much too horrific. I thought it out poltergeist. There's not an ounce of my own personal feeling in Temple of Doom. He later added during the making of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom documentary, Temple of Doom is my least favorite of the trilogy. I look back and I say, well, the greatest thing that came out of that is I met Kate Capshaw. We married years later, and that was, to me, the reason why I was fated to make Temple of Doom. George Lucas, who had been going through a divorce, which I had spoke about earlier, with Marcia Lewis during the film, attributed the film's darkness to the relationship problems. But in regard to the film, said I love the movie. It's just slightly darker in tone and not as fun as the first. So the assistant to the Maharaj, the actor who played him, said, "Let me tell you, the first 15 minutes of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom are perhaps the greatest 15 minutes in cinema." Now, he said this many, 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 many years ago. They are all about what cinema should be, sitting on the edge of your seat in excitement. Harrison Ford said, "I felt it. I felt it was funny and explored interesting dark places. That scene where he takes the heart out, that was a new thing, a dark thing, but I enjoyed it. It also possesses some of the craziest action, the most energy. I think it's a good film." So, I mean, some people were proud of it, and some people were like, eh, it's not so good. I mean, it's interesting. Which do you like more, Romancing the Stone or Jewel of the Nile? Hmm. Um, it's been a while since I've seen both. Eh, I don't know. I can't really give you a definitive answer on that. Um, I don't know. It's been so long. Yeah, I can't really give you a good definitive answer for that. I mean, I would probably say Romancing the Stone, just because it's the first one. Um, but I mean that could absolutely change. So, um, but yeah, it's one of those things. So, okay, so is that is that is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Um, Temple of Doom was I had a lot of fun with it. I really, really did. It was a fun, upbeat, dark. I'm not gonna lie, a dark film, but it was a lot of they mixed a lot of things up, and that was good to see. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that for the film that was done in 19 once again, guys, you got to remember this is 1984 that this was done. So that all being said, I think that it's and I said it earlier, 1984 was a crazy, crazy year. So, and we got so much stuff coming up from 1984. Not only 1984, but a lot of years after. Um, but that all being said, that all being said, so first of all, um, if you got to the end of the video, thank you. I appreciate that. Couple of things. First and foremost, I want to tell you guys what's on the horizon and everything else. So this month, okay, this month, you guys are going to be getting 8 retrospectives, okay, or 7 retrospectives and a perfect movie. I've already edited 4 of them. Okay, I don't think I'm going to edit anymore just because it's time consuming. Deadpool, the heart scene mixed with the chanting of full suspense and crazy for a kid to watch. I was like, well, yeah. If you're sitting there and you're just watching it as a kid, you're like, what am I watching? It's crazy. I can imagine. Excuse me. Like I said, you couldn't get away with this today. There's no way. It's just, there's just, yeah, it's crazy. So you guys are going to be getting 7 retrospectives and a perfect movie. The perfect movie is going to be coming out the first week of every single month. Okay. This month, to start out the year, it's Spotlight. Okay. Um, I'm gonna try and the first streams of 2024. What's gonna happen is that we're gonna have a retrospective for 2023, and then we're gonna have a preview of 2024. Those are going to be um, the first two streams. And then after that, you guys are going to get 1 to 2 streams per week. I have a ton of stuff coming up, though. Okay. I have Ghostbusters. I have Clear and Present Danger. I have Street Fighter. I have, all of these movies in the wings. I mean, we're doing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom tonight. Not to mention, like I said, February is going to be Black History Month. We're going to be doing a ton of great films. That Perfect Movies Get Out. We're going to be doing films like 42, The Butler, He Got Game, In the Heat of the Night, all these films. And then in March, the streams, okay, because I already have all the movies I'm going to do for those. But for the streams, we're going to do Marvel March. The 7 or 8 best Marvel films. And look, it's subjective, but And then in April, 4 out of the 8 are going to be Avenger movies. So we're going to do the Avengers, we're going to do Age of Ultron, we'll do Infinity War, and we'll do Endgame. So we got a ton of stuff. So the reason I'm bringing this all to your attention is a couple of reasons. Main reason. During this time, I'm looking, I've said this before, I'm looking to make this a full-time gig. Okay. I started this last year, had to take some time off. I'm getting back into it. I really want to grow the channel in 2024. Not only monetarily, but, subscribers and everything else. Dadpool is a loyal subscriber. He's been with me since the beginning. Once again, thank you very much for that. And he's believed in me so much that he's done something that, as a matter of fact, he just re-upped it. And that's memberships. Now, you say, well, why? Because, as I said, I want to make this a full-time thing. But I have 2 things. Number 1, I've made this very cheap. Okay? And number 2, take a look at that number over there. It says 0. It's free right now, guys. Absolutely 100% free. Okay? So, what I'm asking is this. You guys are going to be able to get a free month of all of this stuff. Okay? There are 3 levels. I made it super, super, super cheap for you guys. The first one is $2.99 a month. That's a moviegoer. That's just saying thank you. The producer is $5.99 a month. That's, I will be able to give you a few perks here and there. And then that's the middle. And then the big one's $9.99 a month. That's it. It's $10 a month. And I mean, you spend $5 at Starbucks every day, probably, or close to it. You're getting all of this entertainment I'm giving you for $10 a month. And what you're doing is you're believing in me enough to do it. And I'm giving you great stuff. And so what I would ask is this. As I said, it says down here, there's a couple ways you can help out. Number 1, like and subscribe. That's the big way. Like and subscribe. Number 2, super chats. I would, absolutely. Any super chats are much appreciative. Or you could become a channel member. Okay? And that would, be a monetary thing and everything else. And that's what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to grow the channel this year and really do something. I'm also looking to get some more guests in. Okay, and I want to get a few guests in, and that's really connected with the industry. So, anyways, um, that's about it. So yeah, that's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and you know, um, so I'm going to record, either live stream them um, or record them, pre-record them, and then I won't edit them because I want to have everything finished for the month. Um, that all being said, so that's going to do it for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So I, tonight was early. Um, thank you very much, Deadpool, and you too, you too. I mean, let's call it a spade a spade. I mean, anybody who watches these, you know, if you've made it to the end, thank you first and foremost. But moreover, go check Deadpool. He has some fantastic. If you like horror movies, I mean, we were talking about horror. He's got some. I mean, I think he's doing Christmas now that he's doing a Christmas movie every day. Go check his channel out, guys. It's good stuff. It's a lot of fun stuff. It really is. And I thank you for that, by the way. Okay, so that's going to do it for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is another one, you guys. And by the way, guys, don't worry if you're not seeing this now. You're going to be seeing it during the month of January. So, okay, guys, that's going to do it for me tonight. So, do the 3 things you always have to do. Number 1, take care of yourself. Number 2, be safe. And number 3, have a great day tomorrow. So, and I am David Steele, and you have been watching Real Talks. Bye-bye, guys.